Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Just wait a minute or two, some connecting.
Mary and John. Emery.
Good to see some faces.
Hi. Hi, Mary.
I'm going to ask that everyone stays muted for a little while so there's no background noise, but it's great if you want to turn your camera on.
I would love to see faces if you're brave enough to do it. When I zoom into these things, I usually don't show my face either, but I have to tell you, it is so much nicer to see your face than just your name. And you look great, so.
I'll say hi and turn off my camera because I'm really tired tonight and don't want to be on camera, but
Hi,
hi.
Pamela. Okay, no, don't turn off your camera.
Your book just came today.
Let's see, Marilyn, Pamela, Lydia, Chris, Jeff, Genevieve, Gail, Jason, Susan, Nina, and Aaron. And that looks fantastic.
Great. Well, we'd love to welcome Julie Skolnik. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story, Paris Blue. Julie is a concert flutist and founding artistic director of Mistral Music, a chamber music series. Julie's been a principal flutist with many orchestras, has recorded CDs, and lives in Boston. And as we were talking about just before we started here, we have quite a bit in common, including that the Vassar Wesleyan program took us both to Paris some years apart. We both lived in the 15th arrondissement near Boulevard Pasteur and have a deep love for flute and ballet. Also, Julie's from Maine, which may be my favorite state. So welcome, and we'll let you talk a little bit about yourself and give a summary of the book for those who don't have it in their hands yet.
Okay, and my pleasure. And thank you so much, Alliance Française, for inviting me to do this book talk. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. I know how much Zoom we are all still doing. So it is a real favor that you have taken this time to say hello. Let's see. Well, I'm kind of glad that Aaron didn't tell you what the book was about, because it gives me a chance to give you a brief synopsis. This is my book. It's called Paris Blue. It took place over 40 years ago. It began when I arrived in Paris as a 20-year-old student to study flute and to take humanities courses in Paris. It has literally taken me over 40 years to see this story in print. And I will try to explain how and why that happened. But just to begin, this story has been lingering in the corridors of my psyche for so long, and I always knew that one day I would have to tell it. And the reason it took so many years is that initially I wrote down all the details from the early part of the story back when I was 22 years old, and I put it away, and every 10 years I would take it out and work on it and then put it away again. And finally, it went through different iterations. I turned it into a novel once, from memoir to novel, then back to memoir. And then I finally read a book on what a memoir is. And I learned that it is a universal truth as illustrated by a personal story. And once I figured that out, I knew what I had to do. And I cut 100 pages and I restructured it and I figured out what my point was. And I changed the title and it all came together. And that's how the success of this book came about. But to set up, Aaron asked me to do about 10 minutes of reading from the book, just to give you a little feel for what it's like, and hopefully to entice you to order one. And by the way, of course, it's on the big evil empire, Amazon, but any independent bookstore will get it for you. And the Kindle version is only $2.99 right now, in case that's how you like to read books. Okay, so I arrived in Paris to take courses, to study the flute, and I was overwhelmed with the beauty and poetry of the city for the first few months. And then by the time November came around, the sun stayed hidden behind thick clouds day after day after day. And you have to remember that this was the pre-internet era, no phones, no computers, no internet. It was very easy to feel isolated and lonely. So I needed to do something to fill that void. And I looked for a chorus to sing in. And when I found it, and it was the best chorus in the entire universe, conducted by a famous conductor, Daniel Barenboim, it was as if I had won the lottery. So I'm going to just jump to the first time I arrived at the rehearsal, okay? When the rehearsal was over, I could barely keep myself from skipping out the door. I belonged to something I loved. My name was on an attendance sheet. The metro no longer took me solely to random destinations in crisscrossing webs across the city. It now took me somewhere I was expected to be. Daily outings took on a new sense of adventure. I forgot, I wanted to set up one more thing. I didn't tell you that this book is about the grip of first love. And that is the arc of the entire story, is first this intense first love of a 20-year-old and an older married Frenchman that I met in the chorus. And then it follows the story into deep heartbreak, and then more decades where I strove to find answers and find closure to this heartbreak. And so I want what I started to read to you was the concept of love at first sight. I met this man in the chorus, okay? On Thursday night, I returned to the chorus. I was enjoying the music when I was startled by a face on the other side of the semicircle. It was as if a movie camera panning casually across a sea of faces stopped and focused on just one. A young, striking man, around 30 years old, sitting at the end of the second row of faces, and the camera wouldn't move. It was a sensitive face, radiating quiet intelligence. My fascination was less about his looks, however, than about his solemn demeanor, which stood out radically from the bellowing men surrounding him. I couldn't look away. At the end of the rehearsal, he disengaged himself quickly and was out the door before most people had put on their coats. Then I wanted to tell you, that was the first time I saw him. And then the second time was when I saw him up close for the first time. And when this is at a concert, right after the concert. And when the music began, I was transported. Seated on risers just behind the Orchestra of Paris, we were able to watch Daniel Barenboim's communicative gestures and facial expressions as he conducted. This was thrilling for me, as Barenboim was a legend and I had revered him for years. I sang easily and let the music fill my chest. Unfortunately, I lost sight of my crush, as a massive boys' choir was seated between the men and women of the chorus. When the concert was over, tremendous applause brought the soloists and Barenboim back on stage for curtain calls. It surprised me that the chorus left the stage just as chaotically as members of the orchestra. Everyone was squeezing through the crowded hallways backstage. Some members were lining up in the stairwells, others streaming into elevators to return to the underground levels to grab their coats. Suddenly, my handsome bass was brushing right past me. His face was just inches from mine, but he didn't see me, intent as he was on making his way through the crowd. It was the first time I had ever seen him up close, and the effect was no less potent than if I had just imbibed a mythical love potion. My cat is doing very bad things. I followed the stranger with my eyes through the crowds. I watched his tall figure head for the staircase to leave, so I said an abrupt goodbye to a friend and hurried to the exit too. By the time I started climbing the stairs, he had just made the turn in the landing in the opposite direction. As I looked up, he looked down and our eyes met. He sighed with an exasperated exhale as if to complain about the many stairs, and I smiled. I was hoping that he too would exit at level -1 to take the metro home, but when I opened the stage door to the concourse, he was gone. My high spirits from the concert only marginally dampened I headed toward the metro in my tweed cape, wrapping my white alpaca scarf loosely around my neck 3 times and tucking the ends into the collar without freeing my long hair. After the 20-minute metro ride, I sauntered home more slowly than usual. I let myself into the apartment with my unwieldy iron key, walked silently down the hallway to my single room, and stood in front of the antique mirror over the mantel without removing my coat. What did I look like to that stranger on the stairs? My cheeks were rosy and my eyes glassy from the cold walk home. For once, I didn't turn on the radio. It was too much of a distraction. Instead, I washed up and undressed slowly, crawled in between the sheets of my low, narrow bed, and went to sleep with the image of his face in my dreams. It was inside me somehow, like a phrase of music so beautiful I knew I would need to hear it again, or a painting that stayed with me without my knowing why. Now, I read that because a lot of people I know don't believe in this concept of love at first sight. And I'm here to tell you that it does exist. And that was my experience. Having a hard time finding where I'm supposed to be. So the very next spot that I wanted to read is during a concert in which we were singing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. At this point, he had begun to drive me home, and we had started to have an intense relationship of conversation and nothing else. He was very proper. He knew how to drop me off. We kissed each cheek, as the French do, but nothing more. We talked about the fact that I would help him learn English because he needed to learn it for work. When I walked on stage, Luke was already seated at the edge of the basses with an empty chair next to him in the soprano section. He invited me with his eyes to take that seat so that we could sing the concert side by side. Although we could have done this anytime during rehearsals, neither one had dared to suggest it. I sat down beside him under the bright stage lights and could feel his right shoulder and thigh pressing against my left side. It was shockingly intimate. Soon the rest of the chorus members were filling in seats around us, and the remaining orchestra members were sitting down and beginning to warm up. It wasn't long before the hall grew quiet in the expectant moment before the orchestra tuned and Barenboim entered to great applause. There was no way to measure the magnitude of my happiness at that moment. I tried to imagine something that might make me feel this rapturous, but nothing came close. The proximity of Luke's body breathing next to mine, our bodies touching in the stillness of the concert hall with neither the need nor the possibility to speak. The excruciating pleasure of knowing that we were feeling the same thing for the next 2 hours as we listened to the music that we loved. My sensibilities were set free. This music stirred in me such deep sentiment, almost too personal, too poignant to be listening to next to him, as if everything inside me was exposed and there for him to see. It was much like the discomfort of watching an erotic movie with someone you barely know. Our hands rested at our sides, our scores open in our laps, ready to use when it was time to stand and sing. At one point, my left pinky inadvertently grazed Luke's right hand. It was like touching a power line. So this very controlled relationship continued. Nothing more than conversation and at the very beginning of teaching him English. He learned which window of mine was in this building where he dropped me off after rehearsals. Now that he knew which window was mine, he took a chance later that week. Early Thursday evening, I returned home to find a note scribbled with a dull pencil on a piece of paper wedged into my shutters. Thursday, 7 o'clock. Julie, it is raining. It is cold. I am cold. I've been waiting for you for over an hour, sitting in my car. I cannot seem to get myself to leave, as if paralyzed and frozen. But what am I doing here on Rue Brown-Séquard, if not to stare into the distance, hoping to catch a glimpse of you turning the corner in the dusk? Everything seems absurd. To wait in this car in this dreary weather on this sad little street so that you might come smile at me for just a moment and then I'd leave to go home. Call me tomorrow morning. Tonight, I will just think about you. Good night, Julie. Where was I? Wandering around Paris somewhere, not knowing that anyone needed me or was looking for me. Nobody had ever looked for me or waited for me before in Paris. No one had ever noticed if I didn't return home before dark or if I were wandering the other side of the Seine, lost for hours at a time. I held the note in my hand and I cried. Now we're going to jump quite a bit. We're going to jump to when I was living through. Actually, I'm sorry. I remembered one more spot I wanted to do for you. This is when we are now in a relationship, but it always started with teaching him English up in my little maid's room. I got kicked out of that room that I was just describing where he pulled up to my window, but I moved into a tiny little perfect chambre de bonne in the 6th arrondissement on the sixth floor of a building on Rue Bonaparte. And he would come there after work and we would read Wordsworth poetry and Oscar Wilde fairy tales. As he started to read, we would be lying on the bed reading Wordsworth, and he would be spooning me from behind. The more I felt his warm breath in my ear as he leaned over my shoulder to read, the more I let him get by with not just words, but entire phrases that were completely unintelligible. My legs and arms were covered in goosebumps, and after a few more lines, I no longer heard a thing as I nodded yes with my eyes closed. Mademoiselle Skolnik, he said as he kissed the back of my earlobe. There's a cat behind me now, just so you see her. Just ignore her. You were not finding any more words to correct, he asked, and then he rolled me onto my back and kissed me slowly. Quote, this is, of course, all in the name of learning, all part of the lesson plan, I'd say, in between bits and pieces when I could get enough air in between kisses. The lips must be retrained. In a lazy, lust-filled stupor, burying his face in my neck and hair, he said, I found that your pedagogical skills are much improved, Mademoiselle Skolnik, and very effective. These must be the nouvelle méthode d'anglais, the new English lessons. An hour later, I walked Luke to the bus stop. English lesson tomorrow, Julie, he said as his bus drew near. New methods are old, I'd ask. He smiled and hopped onto the bus, stood in the doorway and waved goodbye as it pulled away. I walked around Boulevard Saint-Germain as daylight faded and streets became animated with people heading home to their families, briefcases and baguettes under their arms. I picked up something for dinner from a small market and wandered home slowly. I didn't mind that Luke left me alone. I felt flush with love as I climbed the 5 curving flights of stairs and one steep, narrow one to my Lilliputian living quarters at the top. Collapsing on my low bed to read Madame Bovary and listen to my radio, I felt safe and happy. I didn't care about Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, or any of the dozens of writers who had described the magic of the city. This was my Paris now. And so I think I will just skip to my final selection. The final selection now is a good 25 years later. Well, actually, sorry, one more tiny thing. This is just after the relationship ends and I'm still only 22 and I'm heartbroken and rather traumatized. I couldn't get over how the world around me looked the same when everything inside me had changed. In the middle of the night, as I lay on my back, tears ran silently down my temples as my mother and sister slept nearby. We were in a hotel. It was a different sort of pain from when I was pining for him. No, I hated him with every ounce of my being. I was still in shock from his behavior, and for the moment, that's all I felt, as if trying to emerge intact from a gruesome accident. But as I flew back to Boston, where I was to begin a new life, I couldn't stop thinking about how hopeful I had been. The summer had transformed me. There was a gnawing whisper in me that I would never feel the same way again. Wordsworth said it best in his poem, Tintern Abbey. quote, "I cannot paint what then I was. That time is past, and all its aching joys now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Was nothing that he wrote me true, or was love something so fragile that it could turn to dust just like that in the course of a few days? Phrases from all his letters I knew by heart played incessantly in my ears, like a tune I couldn't get out of my head." And then finally, 25 years later, I was married, happily married, and I had a small daughter, and I was living in Cambridge. And the phone rings, and it's Luke. He's in Boston on business, and he wants to see if we can get together. When I hung up, I retrieved his box of old letters from the top shelf of my closet. That box had migrated from closet to closet in 5 different homes since 1978, and yet there they remained, eerily untouched. I reread some of them for the first time in nearly 25 years. The memories of both love and anguish were as real as if our story had happened yesterday, as if I had compartmentalized the pain and preserved it in a deep alcove of my being. I sat on the floor, poring over them one at a time, surprised that I still remembered the musical flow of each one so well. There were tears. But I didn't miss Luke. I missed myself at 20 when there was nothing in the world I was more certain that I wanted. I somehow knew this would be the last time that I saw him. Luke never made it to my concert, even though I had made a point of mentioning the details to him. When it was over, I changed into jeans, but deliberately kept on a favorite black top I was wearing. I got in my car and headed toward the Boston Harbor Hotel, where new blocks of scaffolding and construction forced me onto streets I didn't recognize. A major snowstorm had been predicted for that evening. "What am I doing?" I whispered several times under my breath as I turned down incorrect one-way streets, getting farther and farther from the hotel. It felt wrong, that it was late, that I was going out of my way to see him, and that if I hurried home, I might kiss my family goodnight before they went to sleep. I had long since worked my way back to wholeness and sanity since recovering from this painful love affair. I had landed intact and thankfully in a rich and fulfilled life with a man I adored. There were evenings when I stood in my kitchen with flour-caked hands trying to perfect my tarte tatin, a fire burning in the living room, the scent of fall leaves outside. My kids would be playing a piece together in the adjacent music room and asking me to join them. "Mom, come play hide and trio with us," they'd ask, and my heart would soar. So why was I here? When you fall in love at 20, I wondered, does the heart form around the other person like an old tree slowly absorbs a sign hung on it when it was a sapling, and then when it's gone, do you forever feel the lack of it, feel its imprint where it once rested? So those are my selections to give you an idea of why this book is all about not just the grip of first love, but essentially the role of memory in our lives too. There's more, of course, a whole kind of epiphany at the end, and also an explanation of the title, which I don't want to do because I don't want to ruin it for you, because I think when you figure this out at the moment in the book of what Paris Blue refers to, it's kind of a nice moment. And so it may not be exactly what you think the blue refers to. So I would love, love, love to hear any questions that first maybe that Erin has, and then what any of you has. And I just want to say that after this is all over, if you think of something later, I would love you to send me an email. I think Erin will put it in the chat, or I can just tell you before we say goodbye. And I would love to talk to you more about this.
Thank you so much for reading. I admire your commitment to this story over so many decades. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how your relationship to the story changed, and also to Paris, maybe when you first got there, and what what that was like. Anything surprising? And I know you've gone back quite a bit since. So
Okay, it's such a long story. I'm so much more calm now than I used to be at these book talks. I've only still done about 10 of them, but at the very beginning, the interviewer asked me something and I just was off and I didn't stop talking for about 45 minutes. So I'm really happy that you are helping me form my thoughts this way. Well, the journey that the book took is just kind of astounding. I mentioned a little bit already that every 10 or 15 years I would haul it out. At first, the very first draft was all in longhand at age 22, when I was still crying every day for 3 months. And I put it all in 3 notebooks. As I sat by the Charles River in Boston, it was in a mixture of French and English. And I had big tears dripping onto my brown ink, fancy fountain pen. And I could barely even read it myself. But it's because of those 3 notebooks that I was able to capture so many details and verbatim conversation from the beginning of this relationship. Usually that's the first question people ask, how did you remember? I never could have remembered. It's because, 45 years or so ago, not more than 40 years, I wrote them all down. At one point, an agent asked me to change it into a novel. So I changed the whole thing into a novel, and then she didn't like it anymore. And then I was so discouraged that I waited another 10 years to get back to it. And then, like I said, I learned that a memoir is about one thing. When I was writing, I was kind of excited by the process, and I started throwing in everything but the kitchen sink. All my 20s, all the bad boyfriends I had for 10 years, from after the Luke experience to when I finally met my husband. Each of those boyfriends got several pages. Now they each get a phrase within one sentence, And then finally, I learned that I needed to cut 100 pages. And the title had its own evolution. At the beginning, the title was A Certain Shade of Blue. And the blue, again, I don't want to ruin that for you, but you will understand when you get to that point in the book. And I'm really hoping that you want to read it. The blue is not just, of course, Paris blue connotes a kind of, blue itself connotes a certain kind of melancholy. And I have the blues and I'm feeling blue and all that kind of thing. But there's something beyond that this refers to. But I had called it A Certain Shade of Blue until the whole 50 Shades of Gray came out. And when that happened, I knew that I couldn't keep that title. So I got rid of it and went to Paris Blue, which is a much better title anyway. And that's how I got to where I am. And finally, about a couple of years ago, I did ask a beautiful editor to take a look. And she helped me with some of the flashbacks, because there was so much material. When you're covering 30 years of your life, it's so hard to know which parts to include and which to, cut on, end up on the editing floor. And then, of course, flashbacks play an important part. You don't want to tell the whole thing completely chronologically. At one point I am seeing him in Boston, but I look back and think back to the earlier relationship. So it was a bit complicated for me. And then I finally figured out how to make it work. So that's how I got here today. And as far as my feeling about Paris, that's such a good question. Well, the real story is that I think that once you have this kind of experience when you're very young, and this is kind of the point of the book, that certain experiences that we have are not to be deleted or canceled or forgotten, that they all are part of who we are in adulthood, even 40 years later. And that rather than try to forget them, because it was so painful and so traumatic and hurtful to me at that young age, which is the reason that it has taken me so many years to get over it, or I needed this cathartic experience of writing the book to find my own closure or write my own ending. But I believe that, a city like Paris is so beautiful and so evocative that, of course, that when I go back there, I am drawn to my same old neighborhoods and to the old memories. not necessarily memories of love for this man whom I would have divorced in 1 month had I married him, but it's the memories of our younger self when we feel things so intensely. It's impossible for me to go back to Paris and not have a few of those feelings, of course. So that's a really good question, though.
Great. At one point you write, Proust understood that there was no greater connection in life than between music and love. This has always been my credo. Could you talk about the music in the book?
Yes. Oh, it's such a good question. And it's such a big one. And my cat is being very, very naughty right now. She's about to pull my whole light off. So if you give me just 10 seconds, I'm going to put her somewhere else. Okay. Hold on. First, I just want you to see her. That's Daphne.
Cute troublemaker. And again, feel free to just keep dropping your questions in here. We will definitely get to them more.
Sorry about that. I'm really happy you asked about the music. Music plays such an important part in the book that I decided to put footnotes. Many of the pieces almost become characters in the book, is what people have told me. Now, I don't know if this is backwards for you or whether you can see that, but it says music in the book. And on my author site, which is just julieskolnik.com, you can see all the pieces, numbers and all the pieces, meaning that if you get to a piece in the book, like the Schubert piano trio, and you really want to know what it sounds like, you just go to my author site and click on the number that you see in the book, number 3, Schubert piano trio. It'll bring you right to a YouTube performance. And the reason I did that is that music is something we experience in such a different way than intellectually. We feel it. It affects our hearts. We can't even, it's impossible to even write about music. And I tried the best I could. And the reason I mentioned Proust is Proust is famous for being one of the very few writers who can really evoke the inner worlds that music can conjure. And even though he's such a difficult writer in French to grasp, I was so shocked and moved by my first experience reading Proust that very year that I was a student in Paris. So music in the book, music is what brought me, it was what brought us together in the book, as you've heard in the chorus, experiencing music, sharing music, loving music together. Somebody asked in another interview, do you think this would have happened if music had not played a part? And the answer is absolutely not. And one of the writers who gave me a blurb said something so beautiful. She said, this book captures the power of music, poetry, and Paris to drive love to madness, which I loved so much because it was almost like the alignment of those things, being in the most beautiful city in the world, singing in the chorus, sharing music, and then the love poetry that he was able to move me with. It got under my skin. You know, what's so fascinating about the book, and I don't want to really do a spoiler, but you will read that when we plucked Luc out of Paris and put him in the United States, it was over in 5 days. It was over in 2 days, but I left him after 5 days. So it's kind of an incredible phenomenon. But the music in the book and in my life, as you know, this is not my job. My real job is playing the flute and running a chamber series. And so music is still really the most important thing in my life. And so, and really it played such an important role in the book. And so I'm really happy you asked about it, Erin. There was a time, sorry, by the way, Erin, I mean, we won't do it now, but on one of my other interviews, she actually went to the author site and played one of the pieces. But I just urge you all, if you don't mind, to listen to some of the pieces. They're so easy to find right on my website, julieskolnik.com, because I can't explain why this music affected me the way it did until you actually are there listening to it.
Well, and another related question is, do you feel that French music is very connected to the language? Should it help you learn it at all, or with pronunciation or anything like that?
Well, that's interesting. That's a good question, but not so. The French music itself per se does not really play a large part we bonded over Beethoven's Ninth that we sang next to each other, Brahms, Mozart, all these big choral pieces. And then, I keep mentioning this Schubert trio because he didn't know it. And he had told me that Schubert was his favorite composer. So I went to Fnac the very next day. Most of you know that Fnac is a big store of records, books, and electronics. And I bought him my favorite Schubert trio recording and, handed it to him through my French shutters in my little room inside an old lady's apartment. And so it wasn't exactly French music per se that was so important to me. I mean, that is a big discussion about how that relates to the language. That's for the academics to answer.
Right. Yeah, I just wonder Fauré, and there are so many great French composers for flute music that I always wonder if that's.
No, you were absolutely 100% right about that.
Let's see, we're getting a lot of questions, so I'll keep mine short here, but you mentioned before that memoirs are typically about one thing, or is there, without spoiling, is there something that big that you'd like everyone to take away from your book?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that I might have touched upon it, but I'll say it in a better way, that first love, if it's very passionate and very intense and ends rather suddenly without closure, it may take a lifetime to get over it. And the second part of that is that our memories give us life and food for future years. They are part of us. You don't try to forget them. Even if it was very painful for me as a 22-year-old, I would never give up that experience or those memories of my life. So it's in a way, the book is about the role that memory plays in our lives as well. So I think that's generally it.
Great. And my last one could be a terrible question to ask a writer, but are you working on another book?
I'm always, it's just like, who are you talking to? I always, it's very sweet when somebody calls me a writer, because even though I wrote a book that people like, and I'm so happy about it, I don't think of myself as an author. So when I came into a bookstore to sign some books, I heard the girl at the desk say, the author has arrived. And I looked behind me to see who she was talking about. But thank you for asking that. I'm not working on anything right now, but I do get that question enough for me to start thinking and start wondering whether I have another book in me. So the thing is, I have a lot of stories in me, but as you know, it's not enough to tell a story. You have to have a point to make. And I don't know what my next point would be yet, but I'm hoping that I do really miss the process. I didn't realize how much I would miss it now that it's over. I liked the daily polishing, trying to find better ways to express something, finding better words. So I do miss it. So thanks for asking that. Now I'm dying to see what those 10 questions are in the chat are.
Yes. So, well, actually, Anne, do you want to read yours, or I can read it? Or you have one?
And maybe some of it was answered. Is there something about Paris, and maybe even specifically about living in a chambre de bonne, that makes a relationship more romantic?
Oh, absolutely. Not only that, but again, I just want to remind you how different life was when you weren't connected 24 hours out of the day with anybody you wanted. I don't think my children will ever, I have adult children now, and they both have significant others. They have never known what it is like to not be able to contact another person. No matter what continent they're on, they're constantly, ordering food for each other or sending texts, across the Atlantic Ocean. So yes, number one, because I was so lonely before I met him, it just brought those feelings into such higher relief, such intensity. And then being in this little maid's room, I had no telephone. In order to make my phone call to him, to make a plan for when we would meet, I had to go, of course, to Café de Flore or any of the famous cafes in my neighborhood and put a franc in the phone and tell him where we were going to meet that day. So the lack of communication with the outside world and living in a tiny little sparse maid's room, reading my French novels that were 700 pages long. Yes, that intensified the whole experience for sure.
Jason Chikantic asks if you could speak a little bit about your daughter's impression and reactions.
My
Or-
daughter? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
For your kids' reactions.
I think it's really cute to see Jason and his whoever. Thank you for joining in as a couple. It's just really sweet. Well, it's a really great question that you asked that. My daughter did read it. She's a fantastic writer herself. All I did was tell her not to read 5 pages because I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. And the book is rather PG in a way because of that. I didn't want to make anybody in my family uncomfortable or embarrass myself either. But she was able to separate herself from her mom and read it as a book. And she really loved it. So that was a great thing to learn. My son, who's only 27, I don't think he's going to be ready to read it for another 2 decades or something like that. But thanks for asking, Jason.
Susan Kane is asking, how did you find a publisher?
Oh, yes. Well, I will be 100% honest with this. I did find an agent. That's really the hard part. Once you get an agent, you will generally be able to find a publisher. Finding the agent was the hardest, but guess what? I couldn't stand waiting for him to find a publisher. So I asked him if we could cut our ties. And then I went and found my own small press. And I found a hybrid. And that's the part that's like, oh, hybrid. In the olden days, it used to be like a hybrid was a taboo thing. Hybrid does not mean a vanity press. It means almost everybody, many good books get published with hybrid publishers these days because you don't have to wait 3 years, number one. And it's so hard to publish a memoir with one of the traditional publishers. So this publisher does both traditional and hybrid, meaning that the author helps out a little bit at the beginning with some of the expenses. The beauty of it was that they accepted my manuscript in January and I saw it in print in October. So it was a very quick turnaround. And that's really what I needed because I'm not getting any younger and I could not bear to wait another 3 years after taking 40 years to see it in print, you know. Well, whoever asked that, Susan, are you also a writer or you just know how hard it is to get books published? I can't see Susan.
I'm an aspiring writer.
Oh, there you are. Yeah.
I have notebooks all over and I'd like to put them together and make one story out of it, but it's not easy to do.
Yeah, you should consider hybrid publishing because you can move it along, but not self-publishing because self-publishing is a whole different kettle of fish. So, you know, there's what I love about this is that it's an actual publisher and it has his, you know, it says Kohler Books on the back and it makes you feel much better than doing it yourself, you know. Some more questions.
Lauren asks, did you and Luke ever discuss the way he treated you and why he left the way he did?
That is such a good question. The answer is no. However, I have seen him a good 10 times since that 40 years ago, and he was unable to give me any insight. It was a real emotional impoverishment on his part. He could not talk about it. And in fact, that's what's so interesting in the book. The book talks about how I try for so many years to try to get some answers and how each time I saw him, I thought this might be the time that he would open up and let down his guard. And it was just an amazingly stupidity on my part to not realize it was never going to happen. And I always say it was like Charlie Brown in the football, you know, and Lucy says, no problem, I promise, Charlie Brown, I won't pull it away this time. And each time he falls for it and then she pulls it away and he, you know, that was me trying to get some answers. So no, I've seen him. And once I said to him, you know, I can't believe you never even apologize to me for how you treated me. And he said something like, I feel that I did in my own way. That's all I got. So yeah, not the kind of, which of course is the reason that it was so hard to move on from, because it was so deeply embedded in me. It's not like an old boyfriend. Sometimes I movies, you see these, an old couple gets together and they have this understanding of what they once had together, and they have this this moment of sharing, but that has never happened, and hence the book.
And does he know about the book?
Well, that's another really good question. I cannot say for certain, but I can wager a guess that he does, because in this day and age, when everybody can know anything they want about anyone else, the book is all over the internet. All you have to do is look for my name and it comes up a million times. I know that for a fact he used to look at some of the concerts that I put on, and on my music series, which, by the way, if you're curious and you're a music lover, it's called mistralmusic.org, little French allusion there. When you click on that and you see all of our concerts and our videos, there's also a thing about the book in the corner too. So I would be very surprised if he did not know about it, but we have not discussed it. I am very curious whether he would be brave enough to read it, so I'll never know.
Just kind of going down the list here, Anne asks, is there something about language and specifically about not being fluent in a language that made your relationship with Luke intense?
Oh, that's such a good question also. I think that, and I read a little essay by someone else about this, which I loved. I think that, when you're speaking a foreign language, you become a different person. I loved the person that I was in French, I loved seeing who I was through his eyes. And I could speak French pretty well with him. I wasn't struggling. So in other words, I didn't have a hard time expressing myself, but I was probably a little softer. I was probably a little nicer. I was probably just a slightly more aesthetic version of my real crazy self that I am. I don't really know, but I remember thinking that I liked the person I was in French. And
I also meant and Luke's not being fluent.
Oh, yes.
Or I don't know if the communication was more in English or in French, but both ways.
Oh no, he could not speak a word of English when I met him, when I knew him the entire year, and not a word. So it was always in French, and that's what was so interesting about it when he finally arrived in Boston, and didn't have his raison d'être, the French language that he cherished so much. It was his core identity, speaking a beautiful, beautiful French. He was really a connoisseur of the language. The first time I heard him speak, it was like music. It was so beautiful. I think it played a very big part in the demise of the relationship, yes, and in the charm of our relationship when it was going well in France, because he was always charmed by my choice of words. Even though I said I spoke well, I still spoke with plenty of idiosyncrasies and wrong idioms and expressions that I would just translate from English into French that didn't work at all. He was constantly, laughing and totally charmed by how adorable my French was, So I think that was one of the things that definitely attracted him to me, because I always chose, I chose funny, creative ways of expressing myself that French women probably did not. Does that answer your question a bit? Yeah.
Yes. Merci.
I see. And one more from Marilyn. How challenging was it to write clearly and objectively and not overly romanticize your feelings? How do you feel about sharing your intimate feelings with the readers?
Oh, so these are such good questions. I'm so happy that you're recording this, because I want to refer back. Thank you. Who said that again?
Marilyn.
Oh, Marilyn. Hi.
Hi.
Such a good question. Well, the reason I changed it into a novel was for that very reason, to protect protect my family. I mean, talking about first love, when you're in a when you're in a happy marriage and your husband knows you're in a happy marriage, and my husband is the true love of my life, which nobody asked me that yet. Of course, most people say, how does your husband feel about this? But I'll get to that in a second. Well, I do feel a little bit bad that I was spending so much time in the book talking about those early sensations. They're not my feelings now, it's ancient history, but still I had to put myself in that moment. It was a little awkward, yes. On the other hand, I just knew that memoir was the only honest, true version that this story could be in. And that's why when I tried to publish it as a novel, somebody suggested to me, you know, Julie, this is not the story. And I started to change things too. I said, that's not the story I want to tell. And they said, well, tell your story and make it a memoir. So it was very clear to me, I had to tell my story that way. Putting it all out there, I like to say as a joke that my life is an open book, because it's just so funny to say that, because I have put so many of my personal details in this book. There are a lot more that are not in there, of course. And sometimes I think about how I wouldn't mind writing about it. Some of you may not know that I actually went through cancer, all 9 yards of it. I mean, what do you say? The full 9 yards? You know, chemo, radiation, lost all my hair, surgeries, blah, blah, blah. It didn't belong in the book because in fact, it happened after the book is over. The book ends about 20 years ago, 20 years ago. I'm 65 now, and the book ends when I was probably, well, maybe 45, the last time I saw him in the story. And the cancer thing happens after that. So there's more to tell. I think I'm going off on a tangent. I don't even remember what my question was anymore. I'm so sorry. How did you, talking about personal things. How did I feel? What, Marilyn, what was the rest of your question? How do I feel about telling personal things, and what else?
Sharing your personal story with the readers.
Yeah. Well, to tell you the truth, it's incredibly gratifying. So because here I have opened up my guts and poured it all out, and the response has been so incredibly heartwarming. I had no idea. I was just happy that the book was published. I wanted people to like it, but I didn't know I was going to get such a great response. And it has indeed been resonating across boundaries of age and gender and sexual orientation. And every day I get an email from somebody who finds me, not just people that I know, yes, but also total strangers who say that I saw your book advertised on Bonjour Paris or something like that, and I couldn't put it down, and it brought back my own stories, and I couldn't stop sobbing at the end because it brought back my last love. And so that is probably the single most gratifying thing that I can imagine. So yes, thank you for asking that. I was worried that somebody would see the synopsis and say something like, oh God, that sounds so trite and so cliche. And thank God I have not gotten that from anybody. And I am so, so grateful. Oh, but you did ask me something really good. I don't remember whether it was Marilyn or Susan who said, how did you not use too many adjectives or something? Was that you, Marilyn, who said that, or somebody who writes said that? I had to boil. That's what the editors say when you're when you tend to be a flowery writer, using too many descriptives, too many adjectives. I took out 75% of what I originally wrote to keep it smooth and clean and not overly emotional. And yet people said that they felt the emotion very deeply. So it's not a natural thing for me. When I write my little program booklets, I write a message from the director before my concerts, and my husband's always been my editor, and he's always taken out excess words that I don't need to use. So that's my instinct is to be too flowery. I like the way that woman looks. Marion John Emery. She's so sweet. She's smiling. Hi. Anything else that comes to mind? Did we miss any questions? May I just say that if you think of something later, this is really easy to remember. My name is Julie Skolnik and my email is julescol, so JULSCOL@me.com. But maybe, Erin, if you're able to, can you send this group of people my email? Would that be okay?
Sure.
So
Yes,
she'll do that
definitely.
so that Jason, that your woman doesn't have to go look for a pen, which I think she's doing. Any last minute thoughts, questions? Nothing too personal for me. I like the personal stuff. Oh, by the way, my husband, if you're wondering, and you'll read about him in the book and when I meet him. Oh, sweet cat. My husband is so cute that he says, to make fun of me, I got 3 pages in the book, which is true. But I hope that you guys feel like reading it. It's a very quick read. People tell me they read it in 2 days. And then please do send me a note if you liked it. I'd love to hear from you.
And also, if you're missing Paris and France, it's a great, with all your details, it really puts you back there. So it's a good armchair travel book too.
Thank you. Anyway, I want to thank Alliance Française Milwaukee for having me. Sweet. I love it when I could read somebody's thing themselves. Oh, thank you, Lydia. Oh, thank you, Lydia.
Merci so much for
Already. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I will definitely send out your email to everybody.
Thank you,
So,
everyone. Thanks for
merci.
coming tonight. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.